Hello, this is Brendan, and welcome to Devlog number 2 for the Blob game. So last time, I talked about the Blob states that I had programmed for the game, but it was just a basic idea back then, and we've done a lot of work since then. So back then you could just roam, the Blob would roam, then it could eat, and you could pet it as well, but it needed a lot more. It needed a menu, needed an inventory to integrate with that menu. It needed attributes to influence how it moved throughout the world, and it needed the fruit to affect the blob physically after it ate it somehow. That was like one of my first visions for the game, and I'm happy to report that I did get it working. So that's the three things that I have to show today. It's a basic menu, and then the fruit type affects the color of the blob, and then we also have an outer world mock-up, and I'll explain why when I fully explain the outer world. So we'll start with the menu. There's some concept art behind it. So there's two ideas basically. One of them was full screen, and one of them was a little bit more minimalistic. So this is the full screen option, and the basic idea is that you hover over the blob, and there's this little detection box. It's called a collider in Unity, and after you hover, or your mouse position enters this little detection box, the detection box itself expands out to fill the entire screen. And my idea was that it would generate these 4 buttons, and this little exit button right here, and then an info panel on the right. And this info panel on the right gave me a chance to come up with different attributes, which is something that we had planned for the blob, like I had mentioned earlier. So those for now are going to be stamina, strength, speed, defense, and balance. And those, it's kind of obvious how those might affect its movement throughout the world, but we're working on how that's going to be implemented coming up. So menu idea 2, as I mentioned, was more minimalistic. It's got the same basic idea of hovering and the expansion and the shrinking of this detection box, but it's more circular, and it's got this option of going all the way outside of the collider and having that exit out of the menu. So you enter the hover zone, and all these blobs appear, or all these buttons appear, and when you exit the entire detection area, these buttons dismiss in a smooth way. So not all of this got implemented yet. These little buttons on the outside were part of a mechanism that I'm not really too fond of anymore. So this settings cog probably will end up in the final build, because most games should have a settings for resolution and whatnot. But these buttons also made it up into the final menu, albeit not in that order. But this use button will generate a little inventory for this specific blob that he picked up in his little events that he's done, and you can drag and drop them into the world to use them, hence the name on the blob. And then info is that panel that I showed in the first idea, and events is your option to go out into the outer world, or you can race your blob was another idea. And then my last idea was to have an arena type event where you can fight your blob against other blobs, and then you can also play with the blob. So Jimmy has come up with a little mini game that you can play with the blob that helps you build your relationship with it, which will help you in the outer world and in other events too. So enough talking, let's get into the game. So I will start it up here, and hopefully it doesn't take too long to load, but so Jimmy did the functionality here. He did the generation of the buttons, and he did the dismissal of the buttons, and he did the on hover mechanism in general. So I just did the animation and the sprites to make it look nice and smooth. So when you hover, they all kind of bounce out smoothly. Hopefully this doesn't kill my CPU, but there it is. and you can tell there's a little bit of a delay as you hover over them. They get darker before you click them, and you can do that. But you can also move in between the buttons, and it doesn't dismiss them, which is nice. It's just another like quality thing. But yeah, that's number one. Number two, throw a fruit in here and show you what happens when the blob eats a fruit. So eating was already a thing, I believe, in the last video, but I was able to get a fruit to affect the color of the blob. So I tried this with a scriptable object. It did not work. I hate working with scriptable objects in general. If anybody knows Unity, it's a separate class than the mono behavior class, which is what most of these scripts are running. So it's not something I'm familiar with, and I've never been able to get it to work. But basically, the blob looks for a game object with a tag of fruit, and it goes towards it, and it eats it. And, oops, I didn't mean to bring up the menu, but it turns the color of the fruit that it just ate. And if you bring up another one, he starts eating it again. He never gets full. It's hungry blob, and he turns more green. And then another interesting part of this is that if I add in another, oh, he's moving quite slow, starts to eat it and turns a little blue. So when he eats a fruit, it has a variable attached to it called color, obviously, and that color is processed by the blob, which reduces its RGB values accordingly. So that's how that works. And then let's get out of here because that is so laggy. And I will move you to the last thing we're working on, which is, okay, I guess we'll see. The outer world. Oh, maybe, yeah, I guess it is. It's really bogging up my CPU to be recording my screen right now, but hopefully you are looking at the outer world the same as I am. So this is our mock-up. The reason that we wanted to do a mock-up is because we're going to be passing variables between this scene and the last scene that I just showed you. That's going to be kind of like the hub world where you feed the blob and play with them and select, like, do different things with them. So this is the world where you're able to explore and use the different attributes that you're building up the blob to gain new key items and stuff. So it's going to be a vital part of the game, so we wanted to get the design started quickly. So there are different paths here depending on what specialty the blob is developed or what the player preference is, its favorite thing to train. You can't influence or you can't control the blob, so you're not clicking left and right to move it, but you're also not just dropping the blob in there and letting it go. So it's not just picking a random direction and going that way. So it's somewhere in between a 0-player and a 1-player game. It's like a 0.5. Based on your relationship, you'll be able to influence it in one direction or another, and it might have a chance of not following your directions. And we're still working on how to perfect that to make it fun, but that's the basic idea. And then these grass sprites here are going to be shakeable, so you walk past, the blob moves past them and shakes them, and then basic items come out of there. So coins and fruit and coin bags and bags of fruit and so forth. Like these simple like items will come out of the grass here, but when the blob decides to follow a path, which would be these clouds, there's going to be little jumping obstacles. There's going to be walls over to the left here. This will get expanded outwards, and you'll be able to break down walls if you build up your strength. And then this ditch down here is for your defense. So if you have enough defense, you'll be able to survive this fall. And there will be a chest down here, and you can get a key item. So those are coming up. It'll make the game interesting, hopefully. And that is it for the 3 things I had to showcase today. Eventually, we will get to the evolutions of the blob, which I've mentioned in the past, and I actually have, hopefully the sprites are looking good here. I have a mock-up of the sprites going, so you can make a guess, I guess, at the different types that these represent. But as you feed a blob more fruits of whatever type, it'll grow more towards that color, and then after it hits a certain age, it'll evolve into that type. So this is, in general, just like a definition panel for what is a blob from a coding perspective, and just from like a game design perspective. So we also want to, if I go back to page 1 here, we also want to do a day system in the future, which just means limiting the amount of activities that a player can do in a day. So, So you can participate, Blob can participate in these events, races, Blob Arena, Outer World, can also eat stuff. So, but we need to make sure that the player isn't doing all of this in the first 5 minutes of playing the game. So the activity bar here, or the hunger mechanism, or the day system, it's all going to be a way to make sure that the player is not going to be doing everything as soon as they get started with the game and evolving their blob through all 3 stages immediately. I want there to be some kind of delay and limiting factor. So that's what's coming up. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.